Hi, everyone, and welcome to this panel about careers in publishing. My name is Dr. Hannah McGregor. I'm a professor in the publishing program at Simon Fraser University, and I'm delighted to be sort of moderating, hosting, participating in this conversation. To start off, I'm going to introduce our three panelists, and then we will start talking a little bit about various exciting pathways into careers in books. So first off, we have Leena Desai. Leena is the outreach coordinator with the Vancouver Writers Festival, runs the VWF's youth education program and liaises with their community partners to expand the reach of their events. Leena immigrated to Canada to attend the SFU MPub program, from which she graduated in 2018. Next up, we have Amanda Lewis, who is an award-winning book editor. Before joining Page 2, Amanda worked for 8 years as an acquisitions editor at Penguin Random House. Books she has edited have become #1 national and international bestsellers and won or been nominated for top literary prizes. She holds a master's degree in English literature from the University of British Columbia. And finally, we have Leslie Hurtig, who is the artistic director for the Vancouver Writers Fest and who brought in guest curators to help expand the diversity of authors and ideas on VWF stages. She is a graduate of the SFU Summer Intensive Publishing Program, the precursor to our Master of Publishing program, back in 1995, and from there began working with publishing houses in a variety of roles, about which I think we'll hear more during this panel. So welcome all three of you.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hi.
Good to be here.
So to start off, I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your various trajectories into publishing or into the book world. We have a question from one of our participants, Margot, who has asked, what type of degree or experience should a person have in order to get into the publishing industry as a career? And so I thought, you could talk a little bit about how you ended up in the positions you're in now. Leena, do you want to maybe start us off?
Sure. So I was always interested in reading and writing. That's one of the reasons why I did an MA in English literature in Mumbai. And I did not end up doing a lot with it immediately after getting the degree. I did a lot of production with films and television, but I was always interested in books and writing and reading. And I wanted to make the shift, and I saw a vacancy for an assistant editor position with a custom publishing house in Mumbai, and I was like, why not? Let's just try it. The worst thing will happen is that I won't get the job. So I went there and I did a copy test. I interviewed with a couple of people and I got the job. So my trajectory into publishing was through the English literature program, but a lot of my colleagues did not have that. In fact, one of my colleagues had completely sort of a graphic design, a kind of this thing. Another had a marketing kind of a background. So it's not necessary for someone to get into publishing without necessarily having an English lit or a publishing sort of a background. And so I worked in that, with the custom publishing house for a few years, and then I worked on Architectural Digest for 2.5 years, and that was a really good experience.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And then came here for the MPub, which is when you.
Yes. Yeah, in 2017.
Awesome. Amanda, you maybe want to tell us a little bit about your own journey into publishing?
Sure. So I also did a master's in English Lit at UBC, but I was very interested in all topics. So I purposely chose English because like Leena, I always liked writing and books, but I wanted to keep my degree really general at that time. And English or literature gives you a chance to study all range of things. So like Victorian England or any number of countries around the world. So when I was graduating with my master's, I said to our grad chair, I have no idea what I want to do next. My friends are doing their PhDs and I don't really want to do that right now. And she suggested, well, why don't you go into publishing? And it made total sense because I'd always edited, I'd edited my dad's work growing up, and I was the editor of the student literary undergraduate journal at UBC, and I loved studying book history and print culture in grad school. And so it's like, oh yeah, why don't I do that? And my professor had worked in publishing in New York before she went back to school to become a professor. So she suggested this SFU publishing program. So when I graduated from my master's, I worked at the BC Book Prizes in Vancouver. So coordinating the Adopt a Library program, which ships books to high schools around the province. It's a great program. And then I did this 2-week publishing immersion at SFU. And it was the best thing because I finally could see what my professor had seen, that I was really interested in not only reading books and studying them, but making them. So the program was amazing because I got to basically think of books and then how I would sell them. And I'd never thought about the selling side of books. And that's something that has become really, pivotal in my editing career. You go into books and publishing because you like books, but then it's a business. You have to learn how to sell the books. So in that immersion, I met people who would come there from Toronto, and Toronto, it still is the case that if you want to work in publishing, sometimes you have to move somewhere else, and maybe not so much a big deal these days. But I said, I'm interested in doing an internship. And if one comes up, and one did, and I did the interview in my parents' basement, and then I moved out to Toronto kind of on a whim, and I loved it, and I got a job, and then I stayed there for 9 years, and then came back and started working here in Vancouver at Page 2.
Yeah, amazing. I also have an MA in English. That might be the secret theme of this panel. Is people who got MAs in English because we like books, and then we're like, actually, I'm just going to do this other thing. Turns out.
Yeah.
Leslie, MA in English?
No, but starting out somewhere different and finding this path for sure. I was doing an undergrad in Canadian Studies at UBC and working in bookstores during the summer and during my classes as I got into the higher levels. And I loved working in the bookstores. It was my absolute favorite thing. So after graduating, I ended up moving to Edmonton and working in a bookstore full time and loving that. From there, when I moved back to Vancouver, got a job as a sales rep for multiple different publishing companies, both in the United States and based out of Toronto. So I began working from Toronto quite a bit, doing both publicity in the province of British Columbia, but also marketing and sales into schools, libraries, and bookstores in the province of British Columbia. It meant a lot of travel to exciting places like Toronto, but also New York City and other places. And I just got this taste for the publishing industry when it took off. I did come back, as I said, to Vancouver, and I did the SFU Publishing Intensive and loved that, got a lot out of that, learned a lot about marketing while I was working there. And then a funny thing happened. I had children, a lot of them. I had 3 children. And I stepped away from work for quite a while. And here's one thing that I do tell kids quite a lot. If for any reason, whether it be parenting or illness or life events take you away from your career path, don't fret. You can step away like I did for 10, 15 years, as long as you keep your foot in the door by volunteering for a board of directors in an area that you're interested in. And that's what I did. I for the whole time that I wasn't working, I was on the board of directors for the Vancouver Writers Fest, and I was volunteering for various different literacy organizations as well. And then when this plum job came open, one that I had always dreamed of having, I was able to just slide right into it because I had the experience necessary, knew the organization well, and knew publishing well by then.
Yeah. Something that's really interesting to me that I see sort of through lines already is how important understanding the sort of business and sales side of things is for publishing. And I suspect a fair amount of our audience are people who self-identify as bookish, who really like writing and reading, and who maybe don't necessarily think that they are good at sales or good at business or good at the math side of things. And I know we often get students in the Masters of Publishing who come in saying like, well, I could never, balance a profit and loss statement for a book. I'm terrible at math. And then it turns out that they absolutely can figure it out, and that your passion for the material can help you figure out the skills that you need to sort of turn it into a career.
Very true.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the sort of surprises you might have encountered as you were moving into publishing. So did you have a sense in advance of sort of starting on these career paths of what you thought a career in the world of books would look like? And what about working in this world has surprised you? Leslie, you want to start us off this time?
Sure. Growing up, my parents owned bookstores in Edmonton. And one thing my dad always told me, my dad was a high school dropout, but he was passionate about books and he read every single book that was in that bookstore, and he was self-taught. He used to tell me that working in a bookstore, if you're reading the books you're working with, and this applies to publishing as well, is the best well-rounded education you could ever give yourself. If you are well-read, and if you open your mind to all different types of books from all different types of authors, then you are going to be a very intelligent, thoughtful person. And so that's always stuck with me. And I have to say, what surprised me about this career path in this industry we're in is just how much I really enjoy the other people that work in this industry. And I think it might be because everybody is reading widely, everybody, fairly open-minded, really wonderful debates, really wonderful conversations about all areas of life. And it's like you were speaking before, Hannah, about the business aspect of things. Yes, this is a business, and an important business, and a money-making business for sure. But what makes this different than other corporate work that you might go into, I think, is this, again, this well-roundedness and the people who are involved in it.
Yeah. I always see this in people who work in bookselling and in publishing alike, is that they are not just voracious readers, but incredibly wide-ranging readers, which, a lot of academics I know, we read narrowly, deeply but narrowly, but people in publishing read broadly, read nonfiction and fiction and cookbooks and just whatever they can get their hands on. And it definitely makes for interesting people. Yeah. Amanda, what about you? What about moving into this career surprised you?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I had a kind of similar experience to Leslie, not the bookstore, but the best people are booksellers. But I grew up in a house of books, and my dad reads very widely. He'll read anything. So that he instilled that in me, and that really came in handy when I was acquiring, fiction and nonfiction. And what that means is buying books for the house, so deciding to work with an author and then publishing their book. I think what surprised me is, that publishing is a business, because up till then I had just thought of books as objects that somehow made it into the world. And I was fascinated by like mid 20th century publishing. And I thought that editing meant sitting around, smoking a pipe and always wearing tweed, or, looking a certain way and just reading books all day. And it's not like that. It's a lot of forming relationships with authors and agents. And that's the part that I've come to really love, which has surprised me. And I got a very good on-the-job education in selling books, not hand selling the way Leslie has done through being a sales rep, but through, you have to sell the book to your bosses basically and say, I'd like to buy this book, and here's why I think it will sell. And that, at first I thought, this is so bizarre and foreign, but now I've come to really like it, because if you can sell that book, then you're going to improve the life of the author, and you'll allow that book to reach more readers. So it's a great skill that all editors need. The other thing that surprised me is I grew up reading a lot, as I said, but for maybe 10 years, maybe from when I was a kid to when I was, say, 17, I just kind of stopped reading. And I watched a lot of TV. And at the time, my parents were kind of concerned, and I was still, doing well in school and all that. But I really like TV. I really like movies, and that's come in really handy in publishing, because publishing is just telling stories in different forms, and publishing keeps changing. So now we have audiobooks and ebooks and different ways of shaping stories. So if you're interested in stories, it doesn't matter if it's through game or film, it gives you an advantage in publishing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting connection between bookselling, acquiring books for a press, programming a literary festival, that at every stage there is this component where you need to not only, read and love books, but be good at pitching books to other people. Be good at sort of saying, like, here's what's really exciting about this book. It's like you practice telling other people about books you love.
Yeah.
A good starting point. Leena, what about you? Any surprises as you moved into this industry?
So my exposure to publishing was mainly through magazines, and magazines and books are two different animals. Magazines are very, very deadline bound, and everything is fast paced. Everything the turnaround time is really, really quick. Obviously, when I came into books, I was like, what? It takes 2 years? How can that be? But I think what is similar between magazines, although the timelines are completely different, the pressure is the same. And, I just see the way magazines have dealt with a loss of revenue as opposed to how books have dealt with a loss of revenue. And I see some similarities. For instance, when I was working with the Condé Nast and Architectural Digest, they handled loss of revenue by aligning with the events industry. So almost every month they would have these events that sort of fit into the philosophy of the magazine. So people would buy a ticket to kind of get this experience of meeting like designers or architects, or they would buy a ticket to get this kind of a curated culinary experience or travel experience or what have you. And book publishing has kind of innovated in similar ways. So for instance, when I was at Simon & Schuster, I did an internship with Simon & Schuster, and their niche is psychological thrillers. That's something they just do like really well. And one of their books was coming out, and it was this like sort of like a, what's called a grip lit, like gripping literature, sort of a murder mystery kind of a thing. And the way they've marketed the advanced reading copies of that particular book is that they wrapped it in fake newspaper clippings. And all the newspaper clippings were, they alluded to the plot of the book. And I thought that was so clever. And I was, another example is I was in the EMPA program, and I met Sonara Geisler, who works at Arsenal Pulp Press. And she just gave us a really interesting example. They had a book coming up which had beer bottles on the cover of the book. And one of the ways in which they marketed that book was by including a beer sleeve with their arcs. And I thought that was so clever. It kind of fit into the content of the book without seeming odd. Or I thought that these kind of innovations are much needed and are a way to kind of, keep the industry relevant. So that's something that surprised me, but also like in a good way.
Yeah. It's another kind of storytelling, isn't it? Right.
Yeah.
You're not just figuring out what is interesting in the story of the book, but also how to tell people a story about why this book will excite them.
And how to make it stand out among the hundreds and hundreds of other books that are being presented at the same time.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, sorry, I'm just looking at my delightful list of questions here. I'm going to jump over to a question from one of our listeners. This is a question from Sarah, who would like to know how students can get involved in publishing and what are the best ways for students to publish their work. And I'm wondering, both sort of like, if you know of any opportunities for youth to get into this world, maybe, who are interested in publishing.
I think Leena and I could both talk to the youth writing contest that the Vancouver Writers Fest runs.
Ooh, tell us more.
And you can work on having something published, and details on that are always forthcoming in the early new year, usually for springtime. But in terms of getting involved in the publishing industry, this may be old school, but I still think that working in bookstores is a great way to get your foot in the door. if you're interested. And obviously, I mean, I don't know, would you guys agree that an undergrad is necessary just to get your, to get your writing up to snuff? You have to be able to express yourself on paper to work in this industry, for sure. You need to be able to write coherent essays, to be able to write well thought out script, I would say, in any area of this job. So I think an undergrad is probably fairly important, but not always if you have worked your way up from other places.
Yeah, and not necessarily in English, though it is one way in. I think communications is a really good option for people who are interested in moving into sort of publishing / media. We've got a great communications program at SFU, and we have a publishing minor that you can add into that. You can start to get some early sort of hands-on experience with some of those more practical aspects. I mean, it's funny you say, Leslie, that starting off in bookstores is a good way, because that was also my first job. Is I worked at a Chapters for 2 years, just as I was starting, right before I started my undergraduate degree as well. And it is a really great opportunity to get hands-on experience and just start to get a sense of like how this whole book world actually works.
I actually hope it's going to be my last career as well. Like, I hope that I circle around and go back to that again. I would love to work in a bookstore again one day.
I have a friend who runs the local bookstore in my neighborhood, and I love to just go by and like hand sell books to strangers.
Exactly.
Love that.
Exactly. Fun.
Yeah, it's still a real passion. Leena, any thoughts about young people getting involved in publishing?
I have to agree with Leslie. The youth writing contest is a great way to sort of get your work out there and have it sort of judged by someone who has experience judging literary work. But also I feel like volunteering for literary organizations. So whether it's the Writers Fest, or there's so many organizations out there in Vancouver and Canada, just volunteering for literary organizations, attending events, and talking to authors or publishers or editors like Amanda, and just like sort of just getting some mentorship, feedback, and just being in that atmosphere, I think it's really encouraging. I mean, I was a volunteer at the Writers Fest before I started working over there, and I thought the experience was just so it's such a communal atmosphere, and you feel like you're part of the sort of a book community. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Amanda,
and
anything
I
you'd add?
totally agree with both Leena and Leslie. Just getting yourself into that atmosphere, as Leena said, is really important, and there are no shortage of volunteer positions. I know I volunteered when I was in my teens and through school. I can't remember the positions at the moment, but it was just important for me to know that there were other bookish people out there. And I mentioned that my dad's a writer, and so he would go to the Surrey Writers Conference every year, which is a huge conference, obviously not happening this year, but hopefully again soon. And I went along with him one year, and it was just amazing. Like, there are other writers. So surrounding yourself with people who also like books is really powerful. And I haven't been a bookseller, but I worked, as the theme of videos, I worked at a video rental store when those still existed, which is still like hand selling, but they're renting the movies. And I love that. I like pairing people with stories. In terms of getting into the publishing industry, I know because I used to run the internship program at the company where I worked in Toronto, and an undergrad is really important to have. And then Canada and the States, there are a number of publishing programs. SFU, of course, has the Masters of Publishing, but there are also shorter programs. You don't have to necessarily get a master's. So I did a few great editing seminars through Editors Canada, and that gave me some specific editing experience. And I did a few courses through Ryerson University's Night School. And I really recommend cultivating the training that you need. So I didn't need a lot of extra training because I was fortunately working in publishing by then. But if you just go after what you're interested in. Before I decided to do my master's in English, I was studying environmental studies because I'm really interested in like social change and environmental activism. And I explained why I went with a more general degree, but that interest has followed me And then I built up a niche editing books about the environment and social change. So you could study biology and then study publishing, and then you'll be surprised about where that might lead you.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, study computer science and then study publishing, or study, there's lots of pathways into this career.
I will mention also art school. So the area of design is so important for publishing and the creating of books, not just for covers and such, but layout and font and all of those interesting things. So people who've gone to art school have sometimes made the jump over to publishing, not to mention the whole area of graphic novels, which is another subsection of this.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways in. This is a question, I didn't give this to you as the list of questions, so I'm going to spring it on you and we'll see how it goes. But I'm wondering, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm wondering, how much our audience might actually know about what your jobs look like. So I'm wondering if you could briefly describe, like, what does a day or a week in your job entail? Maybe Amanda, you can start us off this time.
Sure. I was just thinking, I'm so interested to know what Leena and Leslie do. So I know you're busy year round and your job is so intense. And so my job it's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of meetings with people who work in the marketing, design, sales, distribution, author meetings, of course. And so a typical day might be, I meet with the project lead for the book and talk about how we're going to position it for the marketplace. I chat with the author, and that might be giving them some feedback on their manuscript, or it might be coaching them along. There's a joke, which is actually really true, that an editor's job is half therapy and half editing. And it's true, because I'm just coaching someone to do something that's really hard and creative. So there's a bit of that, working with the designer to say, the author really likes this type of cover, and can we do something like that? Reading, editing, kind of editors are notorious for working on the weekends and the evenings because their days are taken up with meetings with the rest of the team. I'd say that's less of my life at the moment. My job is really wonderful, and so there's lots of space in the day to do that kind of work. But yeah, it's basically just making books. Every aspect of making a book an editor touches. It's not just editing on the page.
Yeah, because there's a lot of different kinds of work that go into making a book.
Yeah.
And then once it exists, there's all kinds of other forms of work as well, about getting it out in the world and getting it to the hands of readers and building audiences around it, which maybe could lead us into hearing a little bit about what, Leena, maybe you want to tell us about what a day in your job looks like?
So I work as an outreach coordinator with the Vancouver Writers Fest, and I work a lot with students and teachers. So we have a youth education program where we have events. We offer a lot of free events at schools. And as a matter of fact, we are in the middle of running our Writers in the Classroom program, where authors interact with students. And that's also one of the ways in which, just sort of coming back to your previous question, when students were wondering, how can I get into publishing? I see a lot of high school students, when they're interacting with authors, they are so fascinated. They are like, okay, so how did you get your agent? And they have all of these questions they want to ask the authors. So I find that these interactions between published authors and students are really, really enriching. And for me, just as an audience member, it's really fascinating to see that kind of, you never know which student, inspired by their interaction with a particular author, decides that, okay, this is interesting. I can maybe, I love writing, so maybe I can also explore a career in publishing. So that's a lot of what I do. And I also, do sort of community partnerships. And unfortunately, because of the year that we've had this year, those have not been as many as we usually do. But I do a lot of community partnerships, and I work with students, and I just handle in some internal Vancouver Writers Fest matters, like, sort of dealing with our members and donors and etc.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I know everybody's job looks a little different right in this particular moment, but just getting a sense of what they look like. Leslie?
It's my job definitely follows the publishing cycle. So the publishing cycle it changes slightly, but it's been the same for a long time. There are generally 2 seasons. There's what would be a winter spring season, and then there's a summer fall season. And books generally get released in one of those 2 seasons. So my job starts at the beginning of the year with talking to all the publishers I can possibly talk to receive pitches from them about the new books that are forthcoming and which authors might be good presenters at the festival. And that we end up getting hundreds upon hundreds of pitches each season from small publishers locally all the way up to international authors, international publishers that are in the UK or beyond. So I spend a good part of my year talking to publishers, talking to publicists specifically to get pitches, to find out which authors are comfortable presenting. That's part of this. It's a very internal job writing a book. Very, a lot of introverts are writing books, of course, that makes sense. So then to expect them to also be good presenters, that's a lot to ask. And so at the festival, we are looking for people who are both good writers and want to be out presenting their book. So I spent a lot of time talking to publicists about that and then programming the events. We program 15 events in the spring and 15 events in the fall for the Writers in the Classroom series that Leena was just talking about. We also program events in partnership with the Vancouver Public Library that happen between January and June. Those are free events that are presented usually at the downtown branch on Wednesday evenings. And those feature authors from all around the world, a lot of local authors during that time for sure. And then come summer, I am head down programming with my guest curator, the Fall Festival, which happens in the 3rd week of October. And that's when we bring upwards of about 100, 115 authors from all over the world to Granville Island here in Vancouver. We host them at the hotel here, and then we put on up to 80 events that are running simultaneously through that 1 week period. So it's a very intensive time. And a lot of my work goes into planning that 1 week, which is over just like that. Poof, and then we start all over again with programming again. My job also involves a lot of relationships with government funders, very, very important for not-for-profits, arts organizations. We are looking for funding to put our events on, to keep it accessible, to be able to present free events alongside our paid events. So a lot of meeting with government funders, also private funders, sponsors, that sort of thing. I work with the development director, I should say, to solidify those relationships and to help fund this festival that we run.
Yeah. Again, a thing that is standing out to me that resonates with me personally is how much a career involves more meetings than I necessarily anticipated. And I think, like a lot of sort of high achieving, semi-introverted kids, I hated group work in high school and my undergrad. I hated doing group work, and my job is all group work. It's, yeah.
The most important part I forgot to mention though, and the best part, is the reading. I read all the time. And I read at night. I listen to a lot of audio tapes on my way. Audio tapes, how old fashioned. A lot of audiobooks on my way to work, on my Walkman.
Listening to books on cassette.
A gramophone. Yeah.
I'm listening to that. I don't know. But the reading is the best part. And oh my gosh, I feel so lucky to collect these books and be able to read them and then meet the authors. What a joy that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I also hear you talk about the sort of events that happen throughout the year. But I mean, that's another great way for young people who are interested in being writers or in being publishers or both to start to sort of get a sense of what that career looks like, is to go to readings. A lot of them are free, a lot of them are online right now, so they're really easy to access, and you can just go and see published authors read and maybe meet some people.
And the really neat thing is, right now, Hannah, you can attend festivals or reading groups right across the country. And so if you have a specific interest in a particular type of writing, you can find a festival or an organization that's presenting that kind of writing. It's endless. There's an endless number of events that you can join right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we talk a little bit about sort of how this industry and the careers that are available might have changed a little bit in the past decade or so, which sounds like a very long time probably for the high school students listening along, and for me feels like a decade was 30 seconds. But it has, publishing industry has changed shape, and the kinds of careers in it, I think, have changed a little bit. And so maybe you could speak to sort of some of the kinds of careers that are available and kind of what they look like right now. Leslie, maybe start us off on that.
Sure. So it's an ever-changing landscape. For a while there in Vancouver, when I moved back here in the mid-90s, there was a boom of wonderful independent bookstores that were just flourishing. They were everywhere. They were on almost every corner. You could find an amazing independent bookstore. And then the big box chains came along, Chapters Indigo, and then the big American chains, and shut down all the independents. And with that comes big changes in the publishing industry as well. And it's a chicken and egg thing in my mind. It might not be, but in my mind, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. The conglomeration of big publishers that maybe start out as, you have Penguin Publisher, you have Knopf, you have Random House, you have McClellan and Stewart. Suddenly they're all swallowing one another to become these big publishing entities. It's happened again with Simon and Schuster being swallowed by Penguin Random House. What happens when that happens is there's a dilution of attention given to any one book that's being published. And it's harder for the marketing team to get their book out there. It's harder for the publicists to find space in newspapers. And that's a whole other issue, media, what's happened to media and how we can publicize these books. So these are some changes that are happening. At the same time, though, in an exciting way, online advertising, the way in which we interact online has become quite beneficial to publishers and the way in which we can sell books there. So there's a bit of this going on constantly. Changes are constant in publishing, and I think that's been since the beginning of time. Change in publishing is constant. Other really positive things right now, and it's early days still, but there's been a call, rightly so, for diversity within this field, a long time coming. And so changes are slowly being made there, where publishers are paying closer attention to who's on the acquisition staff, who's buying books for our publisher to publish right now. We better make sure that we have a diverse group of people who are actually purchasing the books, so that the books are themselves diverse, and so on and so on. That's a positive change, I would say.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Amanda, any thoughts?
Yeah, Leslie, I'm really glad you brought up the diversity issue in publishing, because it's hugely important. And it's racial diversity, it's gender. Sorry, I have an attack cat right now. Just put him down.
Yes, stars. I love this stars.
And when I started in publishing in 2008, that was when ebooks were suddenly, starting, and everyone thought it's the end of publishing. We won't publish books anymore, print books, it'll just be ebooks. And of course that didn't happen, but it really rocked the industry. And I started as an intern at Knopf Canada, to Leslie's point about things merging. And then Knopf merged with Random House Canada. And then Random House of Canada as a company merged with Penguin. So, I worked through these mergers and acquisitions, and as Leslie mentioned, Penguin Random House just bought Simon and Schuster. So the big guys keep getting bigger, but I think that it actually gives a lot of opportunity to the smaller houses. Unfortunately, a lot of smaller presses in Canada have closed, but new houses are springing up. So the company that I work for, Page 2, we're 7 years old, and we grew out of a mid-sized publisher in Vancouver that went through some changes, and the publisher and the CEO decided to join forces and form this new kind of publishing company. To encourage you to look up what we do. It's just a bit different than traditional publishing, and I love it. I just, having worked in traditional publishing, and what I mean by traditional publishing is like Penguin or Random House. Our approach is just a bit more author focused, I think, just a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And I work only on nonfiction now, whereas before I worked on fiction. And the other thing that's changing with publishing at the moment is location. And it doesn't sound like such a big deal because of course you'd move for work, but if you're really rooted in a place, why would you want to uproot to go somewhere? Because that's the tradition, is to go. So I moved to Toronto, but I wasn't really happy about it. I like Toronto, but I love being on the coast. And it was so important to me that I eventually quit that job so I could come back to the coast. And I think people are now noticing that most of our jobs are done online. So it's an exciting time to get into publishing because you could live in Northern Ontario and work for a house based in New York, or, it doesn't really matter anymore. And the point is, it never really mattered. Yeah. But I think that's just going to really bring in an even broader range of talent.
Yeah, agreed. It's going to be easier for the industry to get more diverse when it doesn't require everybody to move to Toronto or New York.
No.
Yeah. Leena, what about you? Any thoughts on how the industry has changed?
I'm really glad you asked Leslie and Amanda to speak first, because they have a much more wider and longer experience in book publishing than I do. The little that I know from having studied MPub and interned at Simon & Schuster, I even when I joined, I did not know that the kinds of publishing that are out there. Nowadays, sort of everyone is a publisher. Because we publish all the time, whether it's on social media or whether it's in a blog or whatever. But it's really exciting to be in a time where you can consider being just sort of dedicating your time to podcasting or dedicating your time to audiobooks or ebooks. These were the kind of avenues that even I wasn't sure were really out there and could be done when I started. But now I've seen, Hannah, you have such a sort of great experience podcasting, and you teach students how they can think of sort of making a career of it. And I think that's really sort of fascinating. So, I mean, that's something that I'm glad these kind of opportunities are there, and that kind of a sort of a diversification of the fields, whereas the traditional media is just sort of becoming one big monolith. The rest of it is sort of diversifying, and that will hopefully lead to more opportunities for students entering the industry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that while traditional publishing is sort of getting smaller in some ways as it all becomes one single giant company, the sort of, rather than publishing disappearing, it's like everything is becoming publishing. So every company has, a blog, a social media presence, like everybody is sort of telling stories really about what they're doing. And so being somebody who is good at telling stories in lots and lots of different ways and good at reaching an audience is an effective skill across all kinds of industries now. It's digital media has really saturated the world with publishing rather than reduced the importance of publishing.
True.
I'm going to ask one last question, and this is a question from Anna Maria, who asks, what is the most important piece of advice we as educators can give to students who love writing and wish to pursue a career?
As a writer, pursue a career as a writer, do you think?
I mean, I think love writing and wish to pursue a career, period. Some will become writers, but I think a lot of people like me who started off, I planned on being a novelist. That was the plan. And then it turned out that I really love teaching. I really love research. I really love community outreach. I love lots of the other pieces around writing. And so my career led me somewhere unpredictable, but it certainly started with a love of books and of writing.
My advice would be similar to what I said before. Get your toe in the door by, as Leena had said, attending events, by volunteering, if you can, for any number of different literary organizations that are around, even your local library, other literacy initiatives. If you want to be a writer, the key is to write all the time, and read, both of those two things. Just go forth. There's so many different jobs in this industry. There's so many different ways to be involved. Experiment. One path will lead to another. That's certainly what happened, I think, for all of us here.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many different kinds of writers. So some people dream about being novelists, and then they become, say, technical writers for a software company. And I would say, think about the type of writing that you want to do, and then set up your life to facilitate that. So if either you want to, whether you want to be a career writer or not, as to Leslie's point, you have to read a lot, you have to write a lot. Forming a community of writers, even if that's in your living room or online, just being surrounded by writers will really help. And some of my favorite writers that I've worked with have been journalists. And the reason I like working with journalists is that they are professional writers. They write all the time, whether they want to or not. You know, they have to get a 1,000-word story out that evening, and they know how to tell a story, and they never miss a deadline. And so they're a joy to work with because they take their writing seriously. And that's what you need to do, whether you're a novelist or a short story writer. I would separate the writing from the publishing. Write because you want to write and you have to tell a story. And then when it comes time to that you want to publish, get an agent. Totally recommend getting an agent, and become known in the writing and publishing community. So to Leslie's point, volunteering, selling books, publishing in literary journals, getting your name out there so you can build up this profile. So when it comes time to approach a publisher, you're kind of a known entity. But start out, again, writing for the sake of writing. Some of the most accomplished novelists out there have a day job. So the Australian novelist Peter Carey worked for something like 20 years in advertising, which is a creative field, but he'd write his novels in his off hours. And there are lots of examples of that. George Saunders wrote his short stories after his day job as a technical writer. I do kind of recommend that way into writing as well. Find a job that pays the bills and that doesn't necessarily burn up all your creative energy. So I'm a writer as well, but I find that editing all day doesn't leave anything in the tank to go then write. But I have a friend who is a postal worker and he's also a filmmaker, and he finds the two pair really nicely. But just keep writing. That's the long and short of it.
It's good advice. Leena?
I agree with both Amanda and Leslie. I think because I started with an interest in writing, I think one of the things that really helped is reading a lot. I mean, reading, because you learn, from the best. And if you want to become a writer, there's nothing like really reading a lot and sort of improving your vocabulary and working on those aspects of writing. But if you want a career in publishing, that's got nothing to do with it. I think just having an open mind. For instance, Leslie mentioned that students are not really aware of the different things you can do in publishing. So, and when I entered the Master of Publishing program at SFU, nearly everyone over there came with the intention of being an editor, because that's the most sort of popular sort of a job in publishing that we know of. But one of my friends, he's working with the press now. And another friend did like a production, like a purely sort of a co-production coordination kind of a job. And both of them are so fascinating when they talk about their jobs and the kind of work that they do. It's really, really interesting. And they themselves did not think that was something that they would get into at the start, So there is a lot of different things that are out there to do in publishing itself. So just sort of learning about the different avenues that are that are available and exploring those is really important. And the way you can explore those is either by the formal route, and so you go and study, or you just sort of network and you talk a lot to people and you get to know what all is out there.
Yeah, I agree. And they're not mutually exclusive paths either. You know, a lot of our students who come in and do their minors in publishing and are sort of following that traditional route of getting the education are also, you know, out there volunteering and getting work experience and figuring out what the industry looks like. And we often have students start the Master of Publishing, as you said, pretty sure that they want to be book editors, but maybe just because they don't know what the other jobs are. And there are lots and lots of other jobs in marketing, in design, in production, in project management, in copywriting, like lots and lots of different ways into the industry. And it always surprises me all of the exciting and different things our graduates end up off doing.
Yeah.
This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you all so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you so much.
Collaborating with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.